At the COP28 Climate Summit in Dubai, nearly all countries agreed to transition away from fossil fuels, marking the first such an agreement in 28 years of international climate negotiations. For more on this, we now speak to Professor Kaitano Dube, Professor of Tourism and Geography at the Vaal University of Technology, and he will tell us more on the outcomes from COP28. Professor, thank you so much for joining us this evening here on SABC News. Perhaps maybe let's start off with what do you make of the key outcomes from COP28?
I think, thank you very much, and good evening to yourself and your viewers. I think the outcome is a mixed bag, and it depends on really where you lie. But by and large, I think we have seen, quite a significant movement in terms of the climate change action. With regards to the outcomes, particularly with the progress that has been made in terms of loss and damage, despite figures, I think the amount of money that has been pledged by developing countries being largely low, I think the action that we saw in Dubai is quite commendable. And we also saw, for the first time, we see that fossil fuels, which some would say is always been the elephant in the room, being mentioned for the first time in a global pact, which signifies a departure and also addresses particularly, I think, the issue of just a transition, regardless of, I think, the cries that came out of that from particularly the, I think, the small island state, which expected more from that particular COP. But I think by and large, it was a huge success, particularly in terms of where the world would want to see itself going forward.
And you're certainly right. The major takeaways for a number of the reports we've been seeing is the issue around fossil fuels. And when it comes to the phasing out of fossil fuels, I just want to ask you, when it comes to South Africa, what does that look like and what does it actually mean for South Africans?
I think the term that was adopted was phasing down instead of phasing out, because phasing out meant to say that the world was actually now departing totally from fossil fuels. But what it means for South Africa is that we have got a lot of our energy comes from fossil fuels, which is coal, which is a natural resource that we have. But I think the message that is coming from COP28 is quite clear in terms of where the world would want us to be as a country in terms of phasing down. So what we should then expect to see is that we would expect to see more of renewable energy coming into the array in terms of energy provision for the country, and also for those companies, private companies that are also using fossil fuels. I think the message is there is need for the country to sort of reduce, I think, dependence on fossil fuels and lean towards the energy renewables, as it were. And this is a message not only to South Africa, but to all the countries. I think you'd realize that if you look at the SADC region, the bulk of our energy comes from fossil fuel. So the message is we need to disinvest in a way to depart particularly from the fossil fuel, our fossil fuel reliance, and lean towards renewables as technology for that become available and also commercially and viable, and also in terms of the usability of renewables.
And of course, many have welcomed this news of fossil fuels and the phasing down, as you say, of fossil fuels. But is there a plan in terms of how the world plans to conduct the phasing down of fossil fuels?
And if you have been following the COP28, one of the things that was clear is that you have got a lot of technology that has come to the fore that can actually assist the world in terms of moving away from fossil fuels. But what we have not seen, I think, is investment in terms of technology transfer, particularly for developing countries, which still cry foul that they are actually paying for the sins that were committed, particularly by the global north, which they feel is unfair. So in terms of the plan, indeed, there is a lot of technological innovation and research that is being conducted across various sectors to ensure that we transition towards an energy efficient economy. So this way you look at, you might be dependent on fossil fuels, but what we need to see is the uptake of energy efficient equipment. When we go and buy our equipment in the shops, one of the things that we then need to prioritize is to look at the gadgets that we adopt, the technology that we adopt, to ensure that that technology is actually energy efficient. But one of the things also which was critical in terms of this COP28 was the mentioning of methane, particularly largely coming from the agricultural sector, which has been, I think, also a center of focus in terms of the need for the agricultural sector to reduce particularly the methane and also the other carbon emissions that are associated with agriculture. So there is a plan, but that plan is, I think we are moving slowly to the detriment of, I think, the world and the ecosystem, as we have seen, I think, an increase in uptick in terms of the extreme weather events, which puts a lot of pressure on government, on politicians, on business to actually depart from our heavy dependence on carbon emissions economy, as it were.
And Professor, of course, we've been focusing a lot on the positives that came out on COP28. What would you say are the failures of this COP28?
I think, for starters, I think, given, I think, the traction that was made during the Glasgow, a lot of people expected to see, I think, a more stronger commitment in terms of moving away from the fossil fuel. So instead of phasing down, most people expected a phasing out and a bit more a robust action plan in terms of that movement. But also in terms of the developed countries putting more money towards climate change mitigation. I think one of the things that came out is that if you look at the amount that is actually earned by top 3 soccer players, it is actually equivalent to some of the money that was pledged towards climate change action. And we see, particularly if you look at the amount of loss and damage that is actually resulting from climate change, and you look at the amount of money that was committed towards that, it's only about 1%, where we expect, I think, hundreds of billions. We saw only millions coming forth, which some feel like that was a betrayal, particularly in those countries that are threatened by sea level rise, which feel that because it is quite clear that if we continue on the path that we are following up to the COP28, we are not going to meet the 1.5 degrees. And definitely, we expect that the amount and the ferocity of the extreme weather events is going to go up, which will damage the economies, particularly of developing countries. So this is a big worry for the developing countries and small island states.
Professor, thank you so much for your time this evening here in SABC News. That is Professor Kaitano Dube. He is a professor in tourism and geography at the Vaal University of Technology. Of course, the big takeaway is indeed the phasing down of fossil fuels. And he says that there needs to be a stronger commitment when it comes to phasing down of fossil fuel and not the phasing out of fossil fuel. But of course, that's the takeaway from that COP28 that we saw take place over the past couple of days.